Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the new Statesman's associate political editor Rachel Cunliffe and the former Conservative special advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome both. And they'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. While responding to the Nottingham killer being given a hospital order rather than a prison sentence, the Metro carries the headline, "No Justice," while the Mirror's headline is Nottingham families fury as their loved one's killer is spared a prison sentence. On the front page of the Express, the headline from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, claiming today's tax cuts are just the start. And in the Eye, Sir Keir Starmer is warned by a former member of Tony Blair's cabinet that he must reverse Tory tax cuts or face squeezing public services. While the Daily Mail reports on a mother and her partner who allegedly fled across the country with their newborn in a Lidl bag, who later died. And The Guardian reports on the EU's plans to stockpile key medicines, which they report will in turn worsen record shortages of drugs in the UK. On the front page of the Financial Times, Baroness Michelle Mone and her husband have had their assets frozen by a court as the pair face a fraud investigation. Both deny any wrongdoing. And the Daily Star has a poll on their front page which claims 90% of Britain would refuse a call-up to fight in any war in the future. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng. Thank you so much for being with us to go through the front pages. OK, let's start with a story that's both on the front page of the Metro and the Mirror, and our lead story as well. Let's start with the Metro. Families fury at stab spree sentence. OK, well, let's go to the Mirror instead. Nottingham families fury. Grace Barnaby and Ian were stolen forever, let down by the system meant to protect us all. And the Metro has a headline, "No Justice." And this, of course, is our lead story, those killings in Nottingham. Anita, starting with you, what have you made of it?
It's just been absolutely heartbreaking. What we've seen today is some really personal and heartfelt accounts of the disappointment that the family members feel and their sense of trying to support each other through such a senseless and random attack. And this specific point about the system has really come through very strongly in their criticisms. So it's really about the fact that, Callaghan, he was known and had been around the kind of police and mental health system. He'd been sectioned 4 times, and there were instances in which they argue he could have been arrested. Perhaps he wouldn't have had a prison sentence, but that might have made a difference in attempting to deal with this. And then also they have the added pain of the fact that he's not being charged with murder because of his diminished capacity, because, as you said, he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and also is going to be held in a hospital. So I think for them, it's just a desperately, desperately sad day.
Incredibly strong words from the family saying the police have blood on their hands, Rachel.
I mean, this is a horrific story, every aspect of it. You start off with the senselessness of the killings, and then the details emerge of the multiple ways in which the services, public services, failed in this case. And the Mirror headline, "They were failed." As Anita said, there were multiple opportunities to prevent this. There were failings in the probation service because he was known to the police before, in police who didn't follow up, in mental health services. He was known to have this condition. He was known to not always have access to or be taking his medication, and this was a tragedy waiting to happen. With the point about him serving his sentence in a hospital rather than a prison, I cannot begin to imagine what those families are going through, and they obviously feel deeply failed, and they feel as though justice has not been done. I take issue slightly with the Metro's headline of "No Justice," because a sentence to spend the rest of your life in a mental institution, a mental hospital, getting the treatment that you need for a condition that you will probably never be cured from, that is a form of justice. The tragedy here is that the services were not stepping in, were not able to step in before something this tragic happened.
It will always be, though, a difficult balance to strike, because there is a balance to strike in cases like this. I mean, obviously, when you see what happened, then it goes without saying. But it is a difficult call for the police to make often.
Yes, absolutely. He hadn't had a lot of obviously incidents even close to this nature. He hadn't exhibited the kind of horrific, violent nature which would obviously put you on a different radar with the police. And it is always a judgment. But the key thing is, were there failings as a result of decisions being taken that were finely balanced, or was it a failure to follow up, to communicate and to understand the nature of the problem? From what we read, it looks like it was much more of the latter. And so in these instances, you do get those moments where, for instance, probation are making a difficult decision and they decide on balance they think a prisoner has exhibited the right kinds of behaviours to warrant this kind of response. And then that does sometimes go in an unexpected and tragic direction. It feels like there is more than just that going on, and that there were moments where questions could have been asked about their behaviour, and also particularly the kind of mental health services in their ability to stage an effective intervention here. It looks as though, the people were very badly let down.
OK. Let's go to the Scotsman now. Totally different kind of story. Their headline, government is accused of cover-up on WhatsApp. COVID inquiry, of course. Inquiries told decisions were made by message despite denials. A lot of things coming out of the COVID inquiry in Scotland as well, and some spicy language there as well.
Yes, Scotland is having its own COVID WhatsApp scandal crisis, as we did here in England with Boris Johnson and all of those messages. Some key points that have emerged. One is that when the scandal over Boris Johnson's WhatsApps broke, Nicola Sturgeon claimed that that was an issue that hadn't affected her handling of the COVID pandemic, and that all the decisions were made through the appropriate channels. There has been evidence given by her chief aide, who has demonstrated that actually they were using WhatsApp just as much as anyone else was. The other thing that has come to light through this part of the inquiry is something that the Scottish government was accused of, Nicola Sturgeon's government was accused of at the time and pushed back very hard on, that there was a sense that COVID could be used, or the pandemic, the handling of the pandemic afterwards, to further the cause of Scottish independence and to make it clear that Scotland's handling was better than the Westminster handling, or that Scotland didn't have the powers that it needed to address a pandemic effectively, and that there was a certain amount of politicisation underway. Now, obviously, those involved have pushed back very hard on that, but I think you can see in those WhatsApp messages a sense of, this is what we're dealing with now, how could we use this to our advantage when it's all over?
Yes, and Liz Jones, Liz Lloyd's, apologies, the advisor to Nicola Sturgeon, actually at points explicitly said that point, about using things for advantage. And the thing that is frustrating about what's happened here is that this didn't actually need to happen. Like, once again, to Rachel's point about politicisation, Sturgeon made a particular point of saying, by the way, this was all the UK government's approach. We didn't take this approach. And once again has been found to be hypocritical, and have said, well, obviously, that the idea that one might sort of say, well, I'm not sure about how to approach this, should we stick with 20 as a way to make decisions, was absolutely abhorrent. But in black and white, she's done the exact same thing. And so I quite understand the nature of that kind of criticism of Sturgeon. The broader point I would make, having been behind the scenes in government, is that there are, of course, formal meetings and formal channels. I was not a big WhatsApp user in my day, but you do have conversations outside of formal meetings when things are moving this quickly, where you have to be, and you are, fairly informal. What did you make of that meeting? Oh, I wasn't convinced by X or Y. What are you thinking, this or that? And WhatsApp is slightly the substitute for that. And I think that, in a way, it's very difficult for bereaved families to see that some of these decisions were made very quickly on gut instinct, because there was nobody else in charge to make those decisions and they had to be made. And so I think that there is a legitimate and very important criticism of Sturgeon, first of all, of politicising this and seeing this as an opportunity for her, which I think actually did let down some of the handling of the response and the degree of confidence that they gave to both the Scottish and people in England and Wales and Northern Ireland about the handling, but also setting herself herself up in this way by saying, of course, we would never do the same, really undermines trust in politics and also damages the SNP.
Because she would have known when she made those criticisms of the UK government that she'd made it in exactly the same way. And she probably would have known, given the pressure on key UK government officials to hand over their WhatsApps, that the same demands would be made of her. So she's known to be quite a savvy political operator, at least up until now.
So why do you think...
what was the thought process going through her head?
I think she thought that there were no... Well, part of the whole issue is the fact that Sturgeon's WhatsApps are not here. Like, there are some from certain dates.
Did she do a factory reset on her phone?
I do think that
back
there
up our
was an
WhatsApps
element of this, that maybe they thought there was less information that would reach the public domain. I mean, even Liz Lloyd, her key advisor, the WhatsApps available are only from September of 2020, which is quite late in the game.
Yeah, a lot of factory resets going on in the Capital Inquiry.
People seem to be losing messages right, left and centre, and I can tell you mine are here from 2020.
OK, let's look at a story and two, I guess, different angles to it in a way. Daily Express, we can pull up now, and the headline there, Jeremy Hunt, today's tax cuts are just the start. You'd never know it's an election year. And then the Eye, which says, Keir Starmer, Labour's tax trap. Starmer warned he must reverse Tory tax cuts or squeeze UK public services. OK, so, Rachel, let's start, first of all, with the Express and Hunt saying that today's tax cuts are just the beginning.
Well, the autumn statement in November, Jeremy Hunt announced a cut in national insurance, and usually changes to the tax code would kick in from April, the start of the tax year. But no, it's going to kick in from January. Most people get paid tomorrow or Monday, and we're going to see the benefits of those tax cuts in our pay slips from that point. And why would they do that? Why would they start it in January rather than in April? It's so people have time to feel the benefits and to give Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt the credit for having more money in their pocket, even though the government has frozen the tax thresholds, which means people are actually paying more tax, even though there's inflation and the cost of living crisis, which means everything's more expensive. I don't think the majority of people will be feeling significantly wealthier because of this, and I don't think they'll be giving Hunt and Sunak the credit that perhaps they hoped they'd get with this actually very expensive tax cut, and because of that, you're going to see more tax cuts to come in the March budget, trying to get across the sense that the Conservative government is doing something for you, but I think it probably will be too little too late.
Anita, your thoughts and also the Starmer line? Well,
I mean, the reality is that, yes, we're in an election year, but the public finance statement from a few days ago is interesting because the expectation was that maybe you would have around £11 billion worth of spending. It was actually at 7.8 billion, so there might be some headroom here. And it's clear that the Conservatives are framing this election as one of being about who do you think is going to control taxes for you. And if you look at what, Starmer's got on the front of the Eye, the broad narrative the whole year is going to be people giving strategic advice on the front of newspapers like this. But they're saying the point, which is like, reverse these tax cuts. And that is the framing that this government is hoping to go into an election with.
And,
go on very quickly.
Well, just the idea that there is extra money for tax cuts is based on very, very deep cuts to departmental spending in health, in education, in justice, departments that have already been cut significantly over the last 14 years. So it's kind of an illusion to say that there is this free cash that we can hand out for tax cuts. Like, nobody in those departments actually believes that is the case. It's a fiction that we're all expected to believe because handouts in an election year.
Rachel, Anita, stay with us. We'll be back in a second. Coming up, a mother who ignored pleas to make sure that her son was given the MMR jab is now urging parents to get their children vaccinated. We'll discuss that next. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng. OK, let's go to a story that I think we're all going to be quite passionate about. A Metro Page 4. Measles nearly killed baby Levi after mum hesitated to get jab. And this is a mother who didn't initially give her son the MMR jab, and then he nearly died of measles. Anita.
Yes, and this is a really important story because we're seeing the cases of measles rise all actually across the world, partly because we travel so much post-COVID. The UK's had to, have an emergency incident called over this, a national incident, because of the numbers of cases that we're seeing. And let's be very clear. I mean, so he obviously had complications due to a severe case of sepsis, but measles can cause disability, blindness. It can obviously cause death, seizures. It's a very serious disease. And there is this pernicious social media story about how it's linked to autism that has meant that we are seeing hundreds and ridiculous numbers of parents choosing not to get their kids vaccinated. And it is causing loss of life.
Because it's the MMR jab.
Yes, it's the MMR jab. And I think this is incredibly important. And even this, I'm slightly frustrated that in the story, the mother says, I get the fear around vaccinations. I don't. I think vaccinations are saving people's lives. And we have to be really very clear about the repercussions of this kind of thing. Most people go and trust their doctor when they say you need X or you need Y. Vaccinations are exactly the same. If you're not a doctor, get your child vaccinated. Even if you are, get your child vaccinated.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that the fear around the MMR jab is due down to a debunked fake study
from the 90s.
Yeah, and it's been decades, and I think one of the reasons that the fear around it still persists is that we don't see measles very often, so people have an idea that it's just like a bad version of chickenpox. It can be deadly. It can leave children with lifelong disabilities, and the reason that we haven't been seeing cases of measles is because there were high rates of vaccination. Now those rates have gone down. It's much more dangerous, and we're seeing what experts are ruling could be an epidemic.
Yeah, and of course it's the more vulnerable children that then end up being more at risk. Okay, as a final story for this segment from the Daily Star, which have an interesting front page, but sort of a serious point. So as military top brass call for a citizens' army to face down who they call Mad Vlad, 90% of us say that we would refuse to fight. What do you make of the whole conscription issue and I guess the fact that most of us would refuse to fight? But I guess if we were at war, we might change our minds.
Well, yes, but I think, what's interesting about this, and I think there's some other papers cover the survey too, I think it's fascinating that 1 in 3 would unquestionably join a war effort. Like, most people don't, at the moment, most of the reasons people give for why they wouldn't fight was partly like, I'm not trained and I think the army should do it. So I think if we had a proper culture of conscription and training and all the rest of it, those numbers might look different. But I imagine most people are just being fairly practical and being like, I don't think I would be that useful in a war. And interestingly, obviously part of the challenge we've seen in Russia, when they were fighting the more defensive part of the operation, was the low morale, lack of expertise, etc.
Defections.
The defections, mothers at home absolutely bereft, because you had conscription. So I actually think it's just not the answer, as well as people being quite practical. Final point, sticking up for Gen Zs. The 18 to 24 Gen Zs are the group that were most likely and willing to join the national effort. So there we go.
I'm shocked by that, because I would have assumed it was the boomers who were all born in the 50s when they weren't involved in the war effort, but who seemed to think that they were, and seemed to think that, young people today should go off. Sure, but the way that you will hear some, obviously not an entire generation, but some commentators, particularly of that generation, talk about younger people is, they just need to fight in a good war, serve their country like we did. And you're like, you didn't, though. You very obviously didn't. So I think it's very uplifting to see that actually the youngest generation is the one that is most patriotic. Boomers, step up.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that anyway. Rachel and Anita, for the moment, thank you.